Welcome to Foundstone Conversations, a series where we chat with business leaders and industry leaders, simply hearing about what they're seeing and hearing across their own sector and sharing lived experiences of their real life insights. And today we're fortunate to have on Patrick Coghlan, CEO of CreditorWatch. G'day Patrick, how's things?
Yeah, they're great, thank you. Thanks for having me today. I've been looking forward to it.
Great to have you on. It's been an interesting 18 months. I know, looking forward to hearing a bit more about your sector and the organisation. But perhaps generally, you know, we're coming into April tomorrow. What are you seeing out there general in the economy, society, and the general business market at the moment?
Yeah, look, I kind of look back at 2020 and I got sick of talking about, negative topics and negative milestones, and that's at the end of the day, that's where we were at, middle of a pandemic, a lot of pressure on businesses, particularly out there, and that's what we specialize in commercial credit risks and understanding which businesses are going to make it and which ones won't. But the way I've been describing it lately is that if you went back to, call it June, July, August, really any time last year in 2020, I don't think the current place we find ourselves in now was even in a best case scenario, if that makes sense. We are so fortunate to be where we are. Business confidence is up, consumer confidence is up. We've spent less money than we expected from a government stimulus perspective. Company failures still at record lows, and look, that's naturally going to increase. But the sort of pressures and doomsday scenario and words that I use, zombie apocalypse and tsunami of corporate failures. I'm on the record saying it, and it was right at the time, but we're not going to see anything like that. So I think we should be really grateful, and that we find ourselves in this position. So the overall the word I would use is positive. That's where we're at.
Yeah, that's good to hear, and it does, when you do rewind back, like you've just talked about now, and for a year ago, it was a very different mindset, isn't it? Or wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Totally. It's been a fast year in some regards, but it's also been, it feels like a lifetime ago that we just started to go into lockdown and everyone started to work from home, and Zoom became a part of the vernacular.
Yeah, it certainly does. So if we rewind a bit in terms of CreditorWatch, and we'll get to the organisation in a minute, but it'd be good to hear a bit about your backgrounds over the years. We can go back as far as you want to go.
Yeah.
Find out a bit about perhaps where you started from a career and a life perspective, and perhaps that builds a bit of a picture of where you're at now.
Yeah. So look, I guess go back to uni. I finished high school, traveled around Europe for 6 months, did the the standard sort of gap year for Australians, which was great. And then I did an arts degree, and really didn't know what I wanted to do at uni. Didn't know what I wanted to do in the future, and an arts degree sounded like, it's probably all I could get into at the time, to be honest. And it was better than getting a full-time job straight away. I was happy to go to uni. And out of that, my dad always used to give me a hard time because he said, what are you going to do with an arts degree? And I said, well, what can't you do with an arts degree is the way you should be looking at it, really. I always had an interest in media and publishing. So my dad helped me get a job at a company called Loyalty Australia for a publication called Dynamic Business, which was an online magazine, for lack of a better description, providing small business news and tips and advice and that sort of thing. And the owner of that was Colin Porter. Fast forward through that, worked for him for 2 years, said, look, I'm going to go get a job at Google or Fairfax or one of the big publishers. And he said, I've kind of got this idea that I've been playing with. Come and chat to me when you come back from your holiday. And that idea was CreditorWatch. So grand plans of going to work for a large corporate turned into day one whiteboard session. How does credit work? How does debt work, what's accounts receivable mean, and yeah, and that was my introduction to CreditorWatch. So I was fortunate enough to be one of two people that Colin hired to start at CreditorWatch, and that was coming up to 10.5 years ago now.
Right.
And yeah, and I'm now running the business. So that's the snapshot for you.
Love it. That it is interesting, isn't it? When we do speak to different founders, and particularly in the tech space, I think the founders of organizations like yourself, and then now leading the business, I think having that perhaps diverse background of not just perhaps growing up in the software world, I think can leaders can bring a different mindset. And I suppose that is a big part of what you do, and we'll get on to that in a second. But what we see, people like yourself that perhaps haven't come down the traditional route through the tech route can be a really interesting way of opening up doors and opening up mindsets. So I think it's fascinating to hear. If we rewind back to those days of founding the organization until and then look at where you are now, what are some of the biggest shifts you've probably seen in technology over those years?
Yeah, it's a good question, and just to sort of touch on what you mentioned there is coming from a sort of a different background. Myself, I was only 2.5 years out of uni, and had been selling online advertising. So I existed in a digital world, so to speak, but it was very sales focused, media focused, selling online advertising. Colin ran a publishing business, and for him, CreditorWatch was born from his customers not paying their bills, right? It wasn't a tech issue. It was a very much a, hold on a second, why isn't he paying his bill? And then speaking to competitors, and the competitors saying, yeah, they didn't pay me either, and going, there's got to be a better way of doing this. There's got to be some sort of solution. And we were fortunate that the third person, or the second person he hired, the third employee, Dale Hurley, who was our founding CTO, he actually had some digital experience, and was ultimately the digital brain, the technology brain behind it, who built it out. So the shifts over that time, as well as my own learnings, have been immense, right? Because I think when you're building a business, you're trying to solve the problem in front of you. You're trying to build a product that works for your company. You're not necessarily totally aware of, a shift to API driven or microservice driven technology builds. You're not necessarily up to date with the latest tech stack that's out there. You generally have someone who, like Dale, is, well, this is what I know, I'm going to build it this way. And I think what we have seen, if you look back, it's more on reflection that you see the big changes over time, and you see things like, in our space, comprehensive credit reporting, the significant growth in cloud accounting with Xero, AWS just absolutely dominating, and then the support and recognition and focus on technology and digital innovation and automation that's come with it. And you realize almost subliminally that you've just gone naturally on that path, rather than going, oh, that's a new technology that's coming out, I'm going to use it. Right, you're using it because it solves a problem you have, or it's going to fit into your processes. So it's been a very interesting journey.
I think what that context you've given us, starting, you mentioned Colin there, the business was born essentially out of solving a real life problem, as opposed to trying to, perhaps we do see in this day and age, technology trying to grapple with a problem, as opposed to starting in a grassroots outside technology context. So I think that's huge, and I think it's good for other people to hear that across technology sectors and startups, because often what we see, and it sounds like similar to how you've grown the business, is it's grown from a very real life problem, and then the technology comes in as an enabler to solve that.
That's right. And all we thought at the time, and none of us had a commercial credit reporting background, right? Colin had been a small business owner. Dale had been a a consultant and got into sort of technology later on in his career. He's a similar age to me. I was selling, online advertising. Wouldn't have a clue how, P&L, balance sheet and invoices, and why doesn't everyone just pay with a credit card? It was a huge learning experience, but we knew that we wanted to create something that was easy to use, scalable, and innovation and tech driven. And ultimately that's what we built at CreditorWatch.
Yeah. And so back in the day, if I've got it right, it'd be good perhaps to hear a bit more about the organization now and where you sit. But if I got it right, that initially, perhaps you were more of a credit bureau, and now you've kind of, previously changed more to a tech company, or has that happened over a period of time, or?
It's probably the reverse. We knew we wanted to build a technology company because, we probably had grand plans to sell to Google for $1 billion. Tech was certainly, starting to become really part of mainstream, business and discussion. And we wanted it to just be all online. We never wanted to hire, Colin tells his story, we never wanted to hire, salespeople. We never wanted to wear suits and collared shirts again. We thought, we don't need that. Build be all tech focused, digital marketing, maybe a bit of PR, and within a couple of weeks, we realized we were in the office and, we were in t-shirts and jeans, and we had to go and rush and buy some suits and shirts to go and have a meeting with, ASIC or with, a potential customer. And we realized, okay, well, I've got 30 BDMs that work for me now, and they're all in suits. So, things change very quickly, but we were always a tech focused solution to a problem. And then we realized, we're actually a credit reporting bureau.
Right.
We didn't know what a credit reporting bureau was. We didn't know that they were out there. But that's, ultimately what we became.
Well, I think, again, hearing that is brilliant, because, again, perhaps so many businesses start, or even if they're an established business, try to become something that they're focused on becoming something that's very mechanical as opposed to the heart of the problem. So that's refreshing to hear.
And I think, you're spot on. And I think, naivety is a great thing, because if we had have done what a well-paid consultant would have done, is, all right, let's have a look at the market. Well, the market was a duopoly that had existed for 50 to 100 years. They were both, doing hundreds of millions or worth billions of dollars. What chance have you got?
Yes.
Find another industry.
Yes.
But because we didn't know what was going on in the industry, we just knew that, as a small business owner, there's no way to tell if this company is going to pay me. And if they don't, there's no way for me to report that company doesn't pay their bills. That was it. Really, really simple.
Because there's a couple of, back then, and there still is, some global players in your sector. So that's interesting to hear. So, naivety, then that's refreshing to hear, because it's an honest perspective. That you really focused on the problem. You didn't get distracted by the noise or the threats of larger global competitors, and you kind of drove based on the customer demand.
Yes, that's it. That's it. We figured if there's, if it was a problem for us, it's going to be a problem for a lot of other people.
Yeah, fascinating. It'd be good too. So in terms of CreditWatch as an organization today, as I understand it, 50,000 plus customers you serve, subscription-based business. Can you talk us through a bit about how the business sits today?
Yeah. So I'll take you through like a quick journey of where we started and where we are now. And ultimately, we wanted to solve a problem for small businesses. And that's what we initially built. We wanted to be subscription, easy to use. No one in small business land was doing anything that looked like a credit report, so it was very basic, and it still is quite basic. But what we learned is that as we gathered all of these small businesses, then medium businesses wanted to get access to it, right? And then medium businesses became larger organizations. And it was probably, a few years in where companies who were using the established, duopoly, the incumbents in the market, came to us and said, hey, we want access to your reports and your platform. And we said, yep, no worries, just jump online and put your credit card details in. And they said, no, like we're a large organization. Like I don't have a credit card that I can put in. So that introduced us to, the what I would call the mid-market or the corporate market, names that you see on buses and buildings and whatnot. And that's what we've done ever since, is essentially just to target larger and larger and larger organizations, to the point where, we're working with, big four banks and telcos and utilities. So it's what we've always said from quite early on, when we realized the importance of data, is that the bureau that has the most customers will have the most data.
Right.
And it's a virtuous cycle, right? The more customers you have, the more data, the more customers. It's quite a simple equation. And we've always felt that, the longer we go, the more valuable our data is, and the better our insights, and therefore you're more likely to land these, big organizations who really, will pick out your data very closely. But there's also, a million businesses out there as well that we can go after in the meantime. So we won't live and die by landing a bank, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So sorry, and that was a long way of answering your question, but where do we find ourselves today? Look, we've got offices in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. We've got about 80 staff, and that'll probably, I would suggest, will grow probably 50% this year. We've got some really big plans for the coming few years, and over 50,000 customers across Australia using us, with a diverse range of products and services and features.
Yeah, that's huge. It's and in terms of you talking to that story around how that customer base has grown, and then how that actually benefits them from that pool of data. That's fascinating. In terms of, as a CEO, things have been changing, especially the last 18 months. And I suppose there's still relative unknowns, isn't there? When we look at the month horizon and beyond, there are still some pretty big unknowns in most different sectors from a few different angles. As a CEO, with 50,000 customers, you've got a huge amount of data. Putting that data aside, perhaps, what are some of the ways that you keep connected to your customers, and perhaps to the slight shifts in the market? I know that, some other business leaders we've talked to, it's about, very real life conversations with the market. So it allows them to get a very real read to adjust. Are there any ways or things that you do to keep really connected?
Yeah, it changes quite regularly as you grow as well. In the early days, I knew most of my bigger customers by name. We're talking dozens, if not 100 plus. We don't have any single customers that represent a huge amount of our revenue, which is great. We don't have any of that concentration risk. But as you grow, you lose that touch, and you then I can't manage the customers anymore because I've got a larger organization to manage. So the focus on, we've always been very focused on automation, which with customer experience is a tough one, because you don't want it to be mechanical, right? You still want that human touch, and therefore you have to continue to invest in people and customer service and account management and that sort of thing. But one of the things that has been really successful for us is running webinars and also live events, which has been great to start doing, because there's no other way of getting. I did one today. I think we had 600 registrations for a webinar about insolvency. Getting the ability to have that many people in front of you in one go and say, hey, ask questions. And that was about insolvency today, but we'll do ones on our product, and we'll do ones on the challenges of working from home in a COVID environment and that sort of thing. And opening up and being quite transparent allows those customers or prospects or just attendees in general to have a way to communicate with you pretty directly. And that for us has certainly been a really powerful way to keep our customers engaged. The next step from that is to get them engaged from a direct feedback and recommendation perspective. You know, a lot of the features, products, benefits of CreditorWatch has been driven by our customers. And in the early days, that was because, you know, we didn't have experience in the space. You know, we built it for a small business owner, right? Small business owners are, you know, they know their product, they know how to sell, they are gun at marketing. No one bar maybe, you know, accountants, bookkeepers, or a specific consultant goes, I'm really good at credit management or assessing credit risk. I'm going to start my own business, right? Yes. So that becomes you know, that's usually a hole in most business owners' businesses. So yeah.
The couple of points you touched on there resonated with me. So the first one was around transparency, and it seems like that from those conversations you're having, those interactive webinars and live events, it sounds like what you're doing, perhaps inherently, is creating that community of customers. Now we see it, you know, on a global scale, and that some people would question is probably these examples, but Salesforce, Microsoft, you know, they've been good in creating actual real life communities, both local and global, as opposed to just a piece of software. So it sounds like that the transparency piece that you've, and I'm sure it's a cultural thing, which we can touch on in a moment. You willing to be open as a CEO, and it flows down through your teams. Customers sense that, don't they? They pick up on that, you know, honesty and transparency, and then they tend to open up as well.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, it's hard to have that transparency and honesty from a human connection level when you're, you know, when a company's just signing up with their credit card and it's pretty much the user just learns through automation, right, through technology. But as we've grown, that part of our business has continued to grow as well. But we've also brought on, you know, salespeople to go out and have that face to face. And you know, it's a fairly, in the early days, it was a fairly simple equation where we would go to conferences and you know, we would have the most fun. We would, you know, put a credit card behind the bar, and you know, we had more fun than the customers or the prospects. You know, we just like to, you know, engage with people. We like to get people to, you know, enjoy themselves and not take, you know, not take the conference seriously, but also see the lighter side. You know, when you've been sitting listening to any sort of conference, it's a long day. So to be able to, you know, put your feet up and have a chat to someone from a social perspective and then go out later, you know, that's how we drove a lot of our new business in the early days. And it still forms a big part. But I think what it comes to is I go, oh, you know, a sale at the end of the day is person to person. And they went, oh, Patrick's great to, you know, hang out with, or he's a lot of fun, or Colin or Matt, or, you know, whichever one. And it comes back to the culture. You know, they go, they're really easy to deal with. They're good to deal with. I'm happy to go and have a coffee with them. You know, yeah, let's do business with them. I know that I can pick up the phone and call Patrick on his mobile and go, hey mate, this isn't working. And I know I'm going to get a response or a reaction.
Yeah, it's I suppose, you know, in technology, I guess technology businesses and beyond, sometimes we can forget about that, can't we? Although it's a, you know, it's a platform service and you can procure it online, you cannot beat that human interaction, can you, side? And it's probably getting tougher in everyone's world because of volume and scale. But it's that point you touched on in terms of, you know, perhaps, you know, you listen probably more to your customers in the early days and still now, because you're listening about how you can develop the product better for the market and for them. I mean, in design thinking terms, some of the world that we work in and strategy, you know, that's, you know, the buzz term is co-creation. And it sounds like that, you know, from a software point of view, but right up to yourself and the leaders of the business, you're always listening for what's happening in the market, customers to respond. Is it fair enough to say?
Yeah, and it sounds, you know, it's one of those things that you probably hear a lot of business owners say, and it's easy to sort of go like, oh yeah, you know, like we love our people and we listen to our customers. But I think, you know, I can genuinely say that's what we do. And if you don't do it, you know, particularly as a small or a growing business in an industry that's been dominated by two brands that every single target company that you're going after has used at one point or another, or is currently using, you don't have a choice.
Yes.
You have to be engaged. You have to listen to them. You have to build a much better product than what the incumbents provide, because otherwise they're not moving over to you.
Yes. Yeah. It's a pretty simple equation, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And on the culture side, you know, in our last conversation we had, I think you gave a couple of examples. You know, you've got significant software development teams,
Yep.
and it was, you know, pleasant surprise to hear about the longevity, you know, of people staying. Can you talk to us a bit about how you've perhaps actively, you know, developed your culture and how you're doing that both now and over the next 12 months?
Yeah, sure. So look, there were three of us at the beginning. We didn't know really what we were doing. We didn't know, you know, whether we'd be in those sort of roles, you know, for very long, and maybe I'd be, you know, looking for a job at Fairfax or something like that. So we had a lot of fun doing it, you know, whether it was long hours and, you know, pizzas after hours, or going to you know, the pub every Friday afternoon, or, you know, for lunch, whatever it was all about having fun. And we were just naturally, you know, we're fortunate that Colin and I and Dale would, you know, we'd just like to have fun. Simple as that. It wasn't a case of, okay, guys, we're going to work 80 hours a week and that's it. We're just focusing on work. You know, we were there. We became very close friends with one another, and it naturally expanded as we hired. Right, we didn't hire a whole bunch of people at once, which I think was a very, you know, fortunate thing to go through. You know, it was Colin was funding it himself, so he would pick and choose when we got to hire a single developer or a single salesperson as we grew the business quite organically, and as a result, we were really picky with who we chose, and you know, essentially we all had, you know, veto power almost to say, I don't think that person's going to fit. You know, I can't see myself working with this person 5 days a week, you know, in long periods of time. So from that, we picked people based on who we wanted to hang out with, as well as their experience, rather than they're just good for the job. It's like, well, they're good at the job, but we're all going to get along here and work together. And, you know, if we have a blow up over something, we can move on from it. So it was quite, again, simple in our mind. Is we want to have fun while we're doing this. It's going to be hard. And as we grew, we probably, you know, you take that all for granted in the early years. And as we grew, we realized, like, oh, how good is this? Like, I always talk about it in almost every interview I do, and they're generally cultural interviews after, you know, their manager and or colleagues have interviewed them before. Is I talk about it almost every time, is I don't get the Sunday blues, right? And I can hand on heart say I may have had the Sunday blues, you know, less than 5 times over the last 10 and a half years. And that's what I want for people that work at CreditorWatch. I tell the story that I'm sitting on the beach with my friends on a Sunday afternoon. It's a couple of years into CreditorWatch. We haven't proven it. We haven't made it. We don't know if it's still going to survive or it's got legs. And I'm sitting, you know, at Bondi, and I go, I'm actually really looking forward to going to work tomorrow, while everyone else is, you know, whinging, or, you know, they've got gripes about their office. I'm going, no, I'm really looking forward to it. Like, work with great people. It's a cool office. We're building a new business. Like, we're winning. I'm very competitive. So we were winning at the time. And that really is how I talk about CreditorWatch to my staff, but also particularly to new people. Like, this is a destination. You know, the office has to be a destination. And, you know, we can talk about work from home and COVID, but, you know, it fits in quite nicely. If you haven't created a destination for your people to come to, why would they want to come, and how are they going to be engaged? And ultimately, we became more aware of how important that was, and sort of doubled down on ensuring that we got the right people that we wanted to work with, that our colleagues wanted to work with. And over the years, there's 2 examples, and I know, sorry, it's a long way to answer it, but there's 2 examples. One, you know, any business, there's always you always have, I call them problem children or troublemakers that come into the business, and we found that they make it through the recruitment net, and they become part of the company, and they actually get identified by the staff before managers, and they're almost, they realize, oh, this isn't the place for me, because no one wants to bitch, no one wants to moan, everyone really likes it here, and they get sort of not ostracized, but they realize this is not the place for them. Which is fantastic. And then the other point is that you touched on from a development perspective. We've got 20 plus, probably 25 in the product and dev teams now. I think our retention rate, to be honest, we've lost, I think, one, maybe two people in 3 years.
Yeah, wow.
The development in our dev team. I would challenge any business that's tech focused with a decent sized dev team to have those sort of numbers. These guys are people are getting hit up. People are getting hit up on a weekly basis by recruiters offering them more money and more perks and whatnot. So it's kudos to our managers in the dev team and all the employees. They're amazing, and we hold on to our staff, and they're all great staff. They're all serious A grade employees.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So culture is, it's one of those terms that's thrown out there, isn't it? And there's a lot of talk, as you mentioned. But it's interesting when you scratch under the surface. We were talking to another CEO recently, and he talks about when you walk into a business, you can kind of feel. It doesn't take long before you get a bit of a feel, and you can't explain that at times, whether it's what someone says or reaction or body language, a feel for organization, isn't it? So it's one of those subtle, nearly invisible things. The results aren't invisible, because when a culture's stagnant and average, you see it pretty quick, don't you? Yeah. Is there any? I guess when you grow, listening to you talk about from the three of you at the start, it's easier to get a feel for someone. As you grow, it seems like you've got to have even a stronger. The fabric of your culture needs to be even stronger. And then, you look at organizations that are 10,000 plus, trying to get a consistent culture is a huge challenge, isn't it? So is there anything that once you've grown now and looking forward, you're seeing out there that you're trying to aspire to, that other people can learn from as well?
Look, I think, we obviously plan for the future, but we don't think too much about it, that's what I'm like. And, my wife would hear that and laugh and say that's an understatement. I don't think too much about the future, and that works in some regards, and it's definitely a pitfall in others. But the challenges that we find, one, we've got 3 offices. So Sydney's HQ, and we've got, I don't know, 50 odd here. We've got 10 to 15 in Melbourne, which are pretty much all sales. And then we've got 4 up in Queensland, Brisbane, that are all sales as well. So that's a real challenge to be able to transmit the culture, over state lines into other offices. And we've done that well, but we've certainly had our challenges in Sydney, in Brisbane, in Melbourne over the years, where it hasn't been where we wanted it for years, and that's when you realize, like, oh, wow, it's actually not easy to have a culture like this. You have to work for it. And you realize that when it's all gone to shit, so to speak. Yeah,
I hear you. It's a constant thing, isn't it? Constant checking in. And, you talked about planning and, planning horizons, and how often there's something that we're seeing, and I'd love to get your perspective on it. So, the traditional strategy cycle, over the years has been, 3 or even 5 year horizons or more. We look at where we are today, and you talk about your experience in terms of strategy or planning. It sounds like you feel fairly nimble, although you've still got the larger direction. We're seeing that strategy and execution are nearly becoming more a single thing, whatever that thing could be. And when I say that, I mean taking learnings from execution and having them to make your decisions and choices. Is that something you're seeing in the sector? And generally, how long are you checking in your strategy to reset if you need to?
Yeah. So it's a very good question. It's actually really relevant for us at the moment as well. And I think, you know, in the early days, we were pretty much flying blind, and you're just chasing every single lead and prospect. And, you know, every time I came back from a sales meeting, I'd walk in and Dale, who was our CTO, would go like, oh, what have you promised now? You know, and it was, you know, it was vaporware and hopes and dreams and glitter and that sort of thing. And we'd build it, you know, overnight and say, yes, yeah, we had it the whole time. And there was no strategy other than try to prove that the model worked. We then moved to sort of annual planning, you know, a few years in, and we had some really good direction from our non-executive board member. And then we were acquired 3 years ago. So 7 years into CreditorWatch, we were acquired by a company called InfoTrack. And they helped us adopt their sort of strategic model. And that took us to another level. And that's it's thirdly. So it's 3 times a year. And I won't get into the reasons why, but from a dev perspective, it's easy. You know, you can build more in 4 months than you can in 3 months. So that's probably the best way to think about it. And that's been a huge boost. You know, we moved from annual to thirdly. So if you got behind on something, it wasn't like you were 9 months away from, you know, putting a new KPI or bonus structure in place as a result, right? People are aligned on achievable targets, and if they miss one, well, then they don't have to wait that long for a new one. We also rolled it out across the business with the InfoTrack model, going from rather than just the 3 execs to every single person in the business has 5 KPIs that they're attempting to achieve, and they all ultimately point up to, you know, the company's KPIs for that particular third. So that's been immensely successful with helping us continue to drive the business, and you know, we're growing at sort of record rates. And then just recently we've started to go, okay, well, we can continue to do that, but let's look at some what we'd call a big, hairy, audacious goal, a BHAG, a North Star, or whatever terminology or strategic paradigm you want to use. You know, what does CreditorWatch look like in 5 years, and what do we sort of need to do to get there?
And do you see those? I mean, the cycles are shortening, as is, you know, company lifetimes, you know, shortening, especially over the technology sector, isn't it? You look at the forecasts around the S&P 500, you know, a company used to exist for 40, 50 years. Now it's down to about, you know, 14, 20 years, if I've got that right.
Yeah.
So just drilling down on the strategy stuff a bit more. So, you know, it sounds like you're checking in through, you know, being transparent, creating communities, having those conversations. And then are you having both that conversation and data feed up to help you make those decisions? Is that generally how it's working?
Yeah, we run a really transparent policy at CreditorWatch. So, you know, we tell our staff how we're doing from a revenue and a profit perspective. We tell them what we're aiming for and why and how we got to that. We strongly encourage them to write their own papers for our strategic offsites that we do 3 times a year as well. So it's about ensuring that everyone is aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and ultimately getting them to contribute, not just from a KPI perspective and a daily, you know, effort, but also from a strategic perspective in going, hey guys, like, this is my idea. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I hear. Yeah, that's very cool. Very good. So to perhaps wrap it up, in terms of, you know, looking at your career as a CEO over the years, and then, you know, the change in the sector even over the last few years, is there any things that stand out to you? One, from a learning point of view, you know, personally, I think it's sharing those lived experiences is enormous, and what our viewer base would love to hear. So any learnings, and then lastly, any guidance that you give from a CEO to other business leaders out there across the community?
Yeah. So look, in terms of learnings, you know, particularly in a startup, I still look at us as a startup 10 years in. You know, I look back and go, all right, you basically have a new role in a new business every 2 years. It's the way I sort of think about it. You know, those first couple of years, flying blind, trying to just build product, prove the model, and then, we raise some capital, and then you go, okay, cool. Well, we reset, and this is what we've got to achieve. And, kind of got through to an acquisition stage, and then post acquisition, you're now owned by a larger organization. And, what are we trying to achieve for them, and what are we trying to do? And I think, a big thing that we went through and that I've gone through is that acquisition. And it's rare that you hear about such good news stories when a smaller organization gets acquired by a larger organization. People regularly ask, well, what's that been like? And it's almost like a pitiful question, but what's it really been like? And I'm like, no, it's been amazing. But really, I'm like, they're just so supportive. They, the experience we've had with InfoTrack, and I report into the chairman of the global group, is one of support. There's no, you have to do this, or we want you to do this. It's, what are you thinking? All right, well, here's some learnings that we've been through. So have a think about that when you're planning and going through it. And, what numbers do you think you're going to hit? Okay, well, why don't we, double the sales team? Okay. And, there's support from not just a strategic perspective, but here, have some more capital and do it. They haven't come in and put their own people in. They haven't come in and, tried to take over. It's just been a fostering relationship and going, how can we help you do that better and faster with our, whether it's money or most of the time, strategic input. So that for me has been great, because, you talk to 99 out of 100 people and they haven't got to experience that in their experience, or their business, or their role, or it's been a horrible experience.
And I suppose it goes two ways, doesn't it? There's probably a reason for that, Patrick, I'm sure as well. Your bit of humility there as well, that there has to be a trust from the parent organization to let things run fairly independently as well. So I'm sure that's across the business, yourself and your team. I'm sure there's that credibility there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, look, we're still winning and we're still growing. So when you're doing that, it's, as the owner, as the shareholder, as the parent company, you're very happy with an acquisition where you don't have to get too involved, and they continue to hit the numbers that you put in front of them.
Yeah, brilliant. And so that last one, in terms of guidance, is there anything practical that either what you're seeing across the market, either your customers got a themes there, or from a growth or a technology perspective, anything you'd leave us with around that area?
Look, I think from an individual perspective, I didn't do very well at school. I didn't do badly, but I certainly didn't shoot the lights out, and I went and did an arts degree, and I always talk about P's equal degrees, and I probably got more P's than anything else. And so I think, there's a theory out there, or there's a thought out there that, you have to be an MBA student, or you have to have done commerce, or you have to have, overachieved. And it's certainly not the case. There's plenty of room in the world for arts degrees and sales and marketing specialists, and people who just want to put the effort in. That's a big thing. I think the other thing is you don't have to be, and this is no offense to people who are old and grey, but you don't have to be old and grey to lead a business or go out there and, raise capital and start a business and that sort of thing. Backing yourself is really important. And I think that's more so than ever. That is clear. You just have to have a look at the companies that are listing on the ASX or globally, and there's a lot less grey hair and experience than there used to be, particularly in the technology space. And I think the other thing is, while planning is really important, it's got to be done at the right time in your business cycle. Sometimes, planning is not really necessary to do. If you don't know who your target customers are, or exactly what your product looks like, or, don't worry about going, oh, we want to have revenue of $1 million in the first year. It's like, go and get the product right. Go and make sure you're out there talking to customers. Don't just expect people to come through to the website from AdWords or from PR or from some clever digital marketing campaign. Like, go out and be told why your product won't work, or why it's lacking, or where it's lacking. Getting that real human element, that human feedback is extremely important.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. And I think looping back to the couple of the examples you gave at the start of the conversation, the business was born out of a real life problem, and hearing about what is wrong and can be improved on a product or service is probably far greater, like you said now, and to have the humility to say yes, and we're going to develop it and change or solve that problem, I think is huge. The other two bits that stood out to me around transparency, and then building an actual genuine community, business community.
Yeah.
I think technology companies, probably can fall into the trap, and in a startup, of building a phenomenal product, but perhaps they forget about the community that are actually solving the problem for. So I think that was brilliant. So thank you very much again for your time, Patrick. It's been wonderful to hear, a bit about your actual lived experience as an individual and a leader. So thank you, and all the very best for 2021.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew. It's great to be involved. So thank you for asking me to do this. It's been fun.